Chapter 6 of The Clue of the New Pin by Edgar Wallace. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Yoganand. The Clue of the New Pin. Chapter 6. Tab gave way to the detective and waited whilst Carver looked. "There's no sign of a weapon, but by the smell there has been some shooting," he said. "What is it on the table?" Tab peered through the ventilator. "It looks like a key to me," he said. They tried the door, but it resisted their combined weight. "The door is much too thick, and the lock is too strong for us to force," said Carver at last. "I'll telephone headquarters, Tab. See what you can get out of your friend. I don't think he'll tell me much for some time." "Come along, babe," said Tab, kindly taking the other's arm. "Let's get out of this beastly atmosphere." Unresisting, Rex Lander allowed himself to be led back to the dining room, where he dropped into a chair. Carver had finished his telephoning and had returned long before Rex had recovered sufficiently to give a coherent narrative. His face was blanched, he could not control his quivering lips, and it was a considerable time before he could tell his patient hearers all that he knew. "I came to the house this afternoon by appointment," he said. "My uncle had written to me asking me to see him about an application which I had made to him for a loan. He had previously rejected my request, but, as had often happened, he relented at the last moment, for he was not a bad man at heart. As he was pressing the bell, the door opened, and I saw Walters. Walters is my uncle's valet." The detective nodded. He looked terribly agitated, and he had a brown leather bag in his hand. "I'm just going out, Mr. Lander," he said. "Did he seem surprised to see you?" "He seemed alarmed," said Rex. "It struck me when I saw him that my uncle must be ill, and I asked him if anything was the matter. He said that my uncle was well, but he had sent him on a very important errand." The conversation did not last more than a minute, for Walters ran down the steps and into the road before I could recover from my amazement. "He wore no hat?" asked Carver. Rex shook his head. "I stood in the hall for a moment, knowing that my uncle does not like people to come in upon him unless they are properly announced. You see, Mr. Carver, the situation was a rather delicate one for me. I had come here in the role of a supplicant, and naturally I did not wish to prejudice my chance of getting the 50 which my uncle had promised me. I went to my uncle's living room, but he was not there. But the door which I knew led to the strong room was open, and he could not be far away. I sat down and waited. I must have been there 10 minutes, and then I began to smell something burning, as I thought, but which was in fact the smell of gunpowder or whatever they use in cartridges, and I was so thoroughly alarmed, and I went down the steps, and after a little hesitation, knowing how my uncle hated being overlooked, I went on to the door of the vault. It was locked, and I rapped on the ventilator, but had no reply. Then I peeped through. It was horrible," he shuddered. "As fast as I could I ran up the stairs into the street, intending to call a policeman, and I saw you. Whilst you were in the house, you heard no sound to suggest that there was anybody else present?" "Where are the servants?" "There is only the cook," said Rex, and Carver went in search of her. But the kitchen was closed and deserted. It was apparently the cook's day off. "I'll make a search of the house," said Carver. "Come along, Tab. You are in this case now, and you had better stay with it." The search did not take a very long time. There were 2 rooms used by Mr. Trasmere. The remainder were locked up and apparently unused. A passageway led to Walter's sleeping apartment, which had originally been designed as a guest room and was larger than servants' quarters usually are. The room was meagerly furnished, and there was evidence that Mr. Walters had not anticipated so hurried a flight. Some of his clothing hung on pegs behind the door. Others were found in a wardrobe, whilst a cup filled with coffee stood on the table. Carver dipped his little finger into the liquid. It was still warm. A cloth had been thrown hurriedly over some bulky object at one end of the table, and this the detective removed. He whistled. Clamped to the edge of the table was a small vise, and scattered about were a number of files and other tools. Carver turned the screw of the vise and released the object in its grip. It was a small key of peculiar shape, and the man must have been working upon it recently, for steel filings covered the base of the tool. "Then friend Walters was making a key," said Carver. "Look at that plaster cast. That's an old dodge of his. I suppose he got an impression of the key on soap or wax, and has been working at it ever since." He looked at the thing in his palm curiously. "This may save us a great deal of trouble," he said, "for unless I am mistaken, this is the key of the strong room." A few minutes later the house was filled with detectives, police photographers, and coroner's officers. They came on a useless errand, for the door remained locked. Tab took advantage of their arrival to escort his friend home. Before he went, Carver drew him aside. "We shall have to keep in touch with Mr. Lander," he said. "He may be able to throw a great deal of light upon this murder. In the meantime, I have sent out all station calls to pull in Felling." "Who is Wellington Brown?" "Wellington Brown? That's the man who has been threatening Trasmere. I told you about him at lunch." Carver pulled an old pair of gloves from his pocket. "Mr. Wellington Brown was in that underground corridor," he said quietly, "and was sufficiently indiscreet to leave his gloves behind. His name is written inside." "You will charge him with the murder?" asked Tab, and Carver nodded. "I think so. Either he or Walters. At any rate, we shall hold them on suspicion. But I cannot be more definite until we have got inside that vault." Tab escorted his friend to the flat, and leaving him, hurried back to Mayfield, by which fanciful name Trasmere had called his grim house. "We have found no weapon of any kind," said the detective, whom he found sitting in Trasmere's dining room with a plan of the house before him. "Maybe it's in the vault, in which event it looks like a case of suicide. I've been on the telephone with boss of Mortimer's, the builders. They say there is only one key in existence for that vault. I was speaking to Mr. Mortimer himself, and he knows. Trasmere made a special point about the lock, and had 20 or 30 manufactured by different locksmiths. Nobody knows which one he used, and Mortimer says that the orders were so imperative that there should be no duplicate key. That is unlikely, in fact I think impossible, that the murderer could have entered the vault except by the aid of Trasmere's own key. However, we shall soon know. I have the best workman in town working at the unfinished key in Felling's room, and he says it is so far advanced that he is in no doubt he will be able to open the vault tonight." "Then it is useless in its present state?" The other nodded. "Quite useless. We have tried it, and the locksmith, who is an expert, says that it wouldn't fit into the keyhole as it was when we found it." "Then you suggest it is a case of suicide?" "The old man Trasmere went into the vault, locked himself in, and then shot himself." Carver shook his head. "If the revolver was found in the vault, yours would be a very sound theory, though why Trasmere should shoot himself is entirely beyond me. At 11:15 that night 3 men stood before the door of the Trasmere vault, and the shirt-sleeved workman inserting the key, the lock snapped back. He was pushing the door open when Carver caught his arm. "Just leave it as it is," he said, and the locksmith, obviously disappointed that he should be denied a full view of the tragedy which he had only half glimpsed, went back to gather up his tools. "Now," said Carver, drawing a long breath, and pulling a pair of white gloves from his pocket, he put them on. Tab followed him into the chamber of death. "I have telephoned for the doctor. He'll be here in a few seconds," said Carver, looking down at the silent figure leaning against the table legs. He pointed to the table. In the exact center lay a key. But what brought the exclamation to the detective's lips was the fact that the one half was stained red. The fluid which had run from it had soaked into the porous surface of the table. "Blood," whispered the detective, and gingerly lifted the flat steel. There was no doubt about it. Though the handle was clean, the lower wards appeared as though they had been dipped in blood. "This disposes of the suicide theory," said Carver. His first search was for the pistol which had obviously slain the man. There was no sign of any weapon. He passed his hand under the limp body, and Tab shivered to see the head drop wearily to the shoulder. Nothing there. Shot through the body too. Suicides seldom do it that way. His quick fingers searched the silent figure. There was nothing of any value. Carver straightened himself and stood, fist on hip, surveying the dreadful sight. He was standing here when he was shot. He never knew what killed him. As a fake suicide, it is inartistic. Apart from the absence of weapon, the old man was shot in the back. If there were any doubts on the subject, they were set at rest when the doctor made his brief examination. "He was shot at the range of about 2 yards, he said. "No, Mr. Carver, it is impossible that he should have committed suicide. There is no burning whatever. Besides, the bullet has entered the back, just beneath the left shoulder, and of course death must have been instantaneous. It's impossible that the wound can have been self-inflicted." Again came the police photographers, and after they had gone, leaving the wall thick with the mist of exploded magnesium, the 2 men were left to their search. The first boxes were for the main part filled with money. There was very little gold, but a great deal of paper of various nationalities. In one box Carver found 5 million francs in 1,000-franc notes. Another was packed with English 5-pound notes, Another was full of $100 bills fastened in packets of 10,000. Only 2 of these boxes were locked, and only one that they looked at that night contained anything in the nature of documents. For the most part, they were old leases, receipts painted on thin paper in Chinese characters, and which they only knew were receipts because somebody had written a translation on their backs. They were bracketed neatly in folders, on each of which was described in a fine flowing hand the nature of its contents. On one thick bundle fastened with rubber bands was an old label, Trading Correspondence 1899. In his search, Tab, who was looking through the box, found a folded manuscript which he brought out. "Here is the will," he said, and Carver took it from him. It was written in the crabbed boyish hand which Tab had come to know so well, and it was very short. After the conventional preamble, it went on. "I leave my property and effects whatsoever to my nephew Rex Percival Lander, the only son of my deceased sister Mary Catherine Lander, née Trasmere, and I appoint him sole executor of this my will." It was witnessed by Mildred Green, who described herself as a cook, and by Arthur Green, whose description of his profession was valet. Their addresses were Mayfield. "I think those are the 2 servants the old man discharged for pilfering some 6 months ago. The will must have been executed a few weeks before they left." Tab's first feeling was one of pleasure that at last his friend was a rich man. Poor Rex! Little did he dream that he would come into his inheritance in so tragic a fashion. Carver put the document back into the box and continued the examination of the door which Tab had interrupted. "It isn't a spring lock, you notice," he said. "So therefore it couldn't have been slammed by a murderer who first shot Trasmere and then made his escape. It was to be locked either from inside or the outside. If there was any reasonable possibility of Trasmere having shot himself, the solution would have been simple. But he did not shoot himself. He was shot here, the door was locked upon him, and the key returned to the table. How?" He took the key and tried one of the air holes of the ventilator. The point of the key scarcely entered. "There must be some other entrance to the vault," he said. The sun was up before they finished the examination of the room. The walls were solid. There was neither window nor fireplace. The floor was even more substantial than the walls. In a last hopeless endeavor to solve the mystery, Carver called in an expert to inspect the ventilator. It was made of steel, a quarter of an inch thick, and fastened into the door itself. There were no screws with which it could have been taken out, and even if it had been removed, only the tiniest of mortals could have crept through. "Still," said Carver, "if we could suppose that the ventilator was removable, we might have taken a leaf from Edgar Allan Poe, and thought seriously of a trained monkey being introduced." "There is the theory of the duplicate key, which I dismiss," said Carver. "I am satisfied that no duplicate key was used. If a duplicate key had been procurable, Felling, or Walters, as you call him, would have found his way to it. He is the cleverest man in that business, and he has lived on duplicate keys all his life. He must have known that it was impossible to gain admission by such a method, or he wouldn't have taken the trouble to make one. He is a specialist in that line of business, probably the finest locksmith of the underworld." "Then you suggest that this key was used?" Tab pointed to the table. "I not only suggest it, but I would swear to it," said Carver quietly. "Look." He pulled the door open so that the light fell upon the outside keyhole. "Do you see the little blood spots?" he asked. "That key has not only been used from outside, where it has left unmistakable markings, but the same has happened on the inside of the door." He swung the door again, and Tab saw the telltale stains. The door was unlocked from the inside after the old man was dead, and locked again upon him. "But how did the key get back to the table?" asked the bewildered reporter. Mr. Carver shook his head. "A medical student was once asked by a professor whether Adam was ever a baby, and he replied, 'God knows.' That's my answer to you," he said. "We'll leave the other boxes until tomorrow, Tab." Carver led the way out of the vault, locked the door with a duplicate key, and put it in his pocket. "My brain is dead," said Tab, and it was then that he saw the new pin. The end of chapter 6.